Okay, perfect. Okay, so welcome once again to Sangha Night. So this is our second Sangha Night for this new year, 2021. And this new year is certainly off to quite a start. So the theme of our year for the San Francisco Buddhist Center, it's a healing communication, or perhaps a transformation through healing communication. And last week, Prasada Chitta, he spoke to us about the Four Noble Truths. And just to quickly recap those, the first noble truth is the truth of suffering. The second noble truth is the cause of suffering, which is greed, hatred, and delusion. The third noble truth is the truth of the cessation of suffering. And the fourth noble truth is the path leading to the cessation of suffering. Prasada Chitta, he mentioned briefly that this formulation, it actually is very similar to, say, a medical diagnosis, where, if there's something wrong with you and you go to the doctor, it gives you a diagnosis. Oh, you're suffering. Oh, what's the cause? Well, the cause is greed, hatred, and delusion. Oh, well, can it be cured? Yeah, you bet. That's the third noble truth. Well, what's the cure? Well, here's the medicine. Right? Now, of course, to receive the benefit of the cure, we have to take the medicine. Right? So it's really interesting. I can't remember when it was, maybe a month ago or ish. I remember hearing on the news for the first time about the COVID vaccine. Well, I was watching the news about it. And I remember when I first heard this news, I breathed this sigh of relief. Like, oh, finally, the end is in sight. And I just felt, just this release of, it's just a sigh of relief. I just felt it in my body. And then fast forwarding to Prasada Chitta's talk last week when he spoke about the Four Noble Truths and this notion of the Four Noble Truths having this sort of medical diagnostic kind of layout to it. And I noticed my response of like, wow, suffering, it actually has a cure. I had a similar response of like, oh, isn't that wonderful that suffering has a cure? Now, I think with regards to COVID, it's very straightforward to take the medicine. As soon as it's readily available, we'll just go and get a shot, and we've taken the medicine, and we'll experience the benefit of the cure. In terms of receiving the Dharma, receiving this healing communication from the Buddha, we also have to take the medicine. But it's not as simple as taking a shot. I'm sort of reminded of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the bit where, oh, here's a pill for US history. Nope. Here's a pill for Spanish. Nope. If only it were that simple, just to take the cure, to take the medicine. So what does this mean, to take the medicine, to receive fully this healing communication that the Buddha has so clearly laid out for us? And in response to this, I'd like to first invite Pamatara, if you could share the screen of that very first number one, the 3 levels of wisdom. Yeah. So this is one model in which one can take the medicine and receive the full benefit of the cure, of freedom from suffering. And this model, it comes from the later Buddhist tradition, from the commentarial tradition. And what this model lays out is 3 levels of wisdom. And each level is deeper than the previous level. So the first level of wisdom is called Sutta Maya Prajna, which is sutta. This word, it's a Sanskrit word. It means listening, to listen. So we first need to listen. We need to develop an intellectual understanding of what's being taught. But it goes, but taking the medicine goes far beyond just an intellectual understanding. Once we understand intellectually what the teaching is pointing at, we actually need to progress to the second level of wisdom, which is called Chintamaya Prajna. And this word chinta means thinking. So it's reflection and contemplation. So we have to consider these teachings carefully. What are the implications of this teaching with regards to my life? So with regards to the Four Noble Truths, the fourth noble truth, it describes the path leading to the cessation of suffering, the Eightfold Path specifically. So we have to reflect and contemplate on that. Well, is that something I really want to do? Do I want to really put energy into that? Does this even make sense to me? Do I buy into this? So just to reflect and contemplate and at a deeper level. And then if we are convinced through this process of reflection and contemplation, if we are convinced that, this sounds like a pretty good idea, I think I'm going to give this a go, then we have to actually apply effort. So this third level of wisdom is called Bhavana Maya Prajna. And bhavana is the same word in the metta bhavana. So it means becoming. So this is traditionally it's translated, this third level of wisdom is cultivating wisdom through meditation. One could say it's becoming the wisdom. And I like to use the expression of embodied knowing. That's the fruit. So I think it's quite interesting, quite helpful to juxtapose the first level of wisdom, as I'm referring to as intellectual understanding, with the third level of wisdom, which is embodied knowing. So these are 2 very, very different ways of knowing something. So Pamatar, if I could invite you to stop the screen share. Great. So in terms of understanding the Dharma, reflecting on the Dharma, and cultivating, what's being pointed at, embodying the truths that are being pointed at. Yeah. This is a very difficult thing to do. So as a matter of fact, the Buddha, this is what he said, how he described his teachings. He said this: the doctrine is profound, hard to see, difficult to understand, sublime, subtle, not within the sphere of logic, to be understood by the wise. This doctrine is profound, hard to see, difficult to understand, subtle, sublime, not within the sphere of logic, to be understood by the wise. So we're going to explore this notion of wisdom this notion of truth through the lens of one of the teachings of the Pali Canon, one of the teachings of the Buddha. And this particular teaching, it's called the Canki Sutta. So Canki is the name of a Brahmin who is featured in this particular story with the Buddha. And in this sutta, the Buddha responds to 3 different questions. Actually, there's a 4th question, but we're only going to deal with 3 of them tonight. So the first question has to do with the nature of truth. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. Like, what is the nature of truth? And the second question is, how can truth be preserved? And the third question is, how is truth discovered? What's the nature of truth? How is truth preserved? And how is truth discovered? Okay. So first we're going to start with, what is the nature of truth? Right. So it's a very interesting question. When I turned my mind to it. So one of the things that came to mind was the reliability of eyewitnesses in crime scenes. Right. So this is very well documented that the testimony of eyewitnesses can be influenced by many different factors. So one of those factors, just to give an example, is if the event was violent, eyewitnesses will tend to have less memory of it versus an event that was non-violent. Yeah. So there's many factors that can influence, the accuracy of an eyewitness testimony. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting. Well, what's true? How do we sort that out? And then, of course, if we turn on the news and see what's going on in the headlines, it's very clear that there's a lot of people with very strong views about who won the election. And it really strikes me that that people are really choosing what to believe. So just the notion of truth, in the public domain, the erosion of truth, what's going on with that? Right? So truth. So truth, there's this other layer as well, where truth is actually, it's highly subjective. So from a Buddhist perspective, what I perceive to be the truth is actually distorted by my own greed, hatred, and delusion. Similarly, what everyone else sees, their perspectives, their perceptions are distorted by their greed, hatred, and delusion. So I'll just give a very simple example of this. For anyone who's had a romantic relationship, so you go on your first date and you have that honeymoon phase where everything is great. And in this example, all the positive qualities, we amplify them in our minds. Oh, this is so incredible. This is so wonderful. And all the, potentially negative qualities, we tend to set to the side. We tend to not really look at those, right? So we choose in a particular way what we want to see. Right? So our personal experience of what is true, it's highly subjective. So of course, it's really interesting when you get two people with their own versions of the truth, which are not aligned with each other. And of course, that's a very common way in which conflict arises. Right. So the Buddha actually has a lot to say about this, about what is the nature of truth. But before I get into that, I wanted to make this distinction between worldly truths. So, for example, truths we see on the news, or maybe not truths, what we hear on the news, worldly views, worldly perspectives, and spiritual truths. Right. So, spoiler alert, this is what the Buddha says about the nature of truth, is he makes this distinction of, I think intellectual understanding and embodied knowing is a very helpful distinction, right? And about embodied knowing, what the Buddha says about this is it's embodied knowing is to know something through one's own direct experience and to penetrate it with wisdom. To know something through one's direct experience and to penetrate it with wisdom. So this is what a spiritual truth, the nature of a spiritual truth. To truly know a spiritual truth, we need to directly experience it and penetrate it with wisdom. Now, in terms of a worldly truth, there is absolutely no way that I can know through my own direct experience who won the election. There's just no way that I can know that. So, but I'm still choosing my beliefs. Yeah, I definitely have beliefs, and I'm choosing them. Yeah. But in terms of worldly truths, right, there's this notion of, in our legal system, in terms of what is true. Right? So one is innocent until proven guilty, and that proof of guilt, it's not 100%, I am absolutely positively certain that this person is guilty. It's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So there's still the possibility that the person may be innocent. Right? So in the world out there, the bar for truth is beyond a reasonable doubt. So I can say, I think this person won the election beyond a reasonable doubt, but I cannot say, I believe this person won the election because I know this through my own direct experience and I have penetrated it with wisdom. It's simply something that I cannot know. Yeah. So I think this term, beyond a reasonable doubt, it's actually a very important turn of phrase as we turn our attention to this, to the Canki Sutta. So in terms of the nature of truth, the nature of our subjective truths, let's see. Okay, I'll just read this little excerpt from the Canki Sutta. Yeah, because there's a little story here in the Canki Sutta, and I'll share a bit of it with you. Is a Brahmin goes to visit the Buddha. This happens very commonly in the Pali Canon, the stories of the Buddha, where people come to ask the Buddha questions and to receive teachings from him, or to debate with him, or to argue with him. So there's lots of stories in the Pali Canon about these dialogues between the Buddha and people who come to question him. So in the Canki Sutta, there is a Brahmin who comes and asks the Buddha this question. So I'll just read the question to you. And this is a claim about absolute truth. So it's really a question about the nature of truth. Gautama, the contemplative, has turned to me. Suppose I ask him a question. So here's the question. Sorry, that was the line before the question. Master Gautama, with regard to the ancient hymns of the Brahmins, passed down through oral transmission and included in their canon, the Brahmins have come to the definite conclusion that only this is true. Anything else is worthless. What does Master Gautama have to say to this? And here's the Buddha's response. He says, tell me, Brahmin, is there among the Brahmins even one Brahmin who says, I know this, this I see, only this is true, anything else is worthless? And the Brahmin responds, no, Master Gautama. So that's the dialogue, a little excerpt of the dialogue. So now we're in the domain of spiritual truth. So basically what the Buddha is saying to this Brahmin, so the Brahmin is saying, hey, from this oral tradition, Brahmins believe that these sacred texts, these Brahminical hymns, only this is true and everything else is worthless. And the Brahmin wants to know what the Buddha thinks of this. And the Buddha basically says, he asked this Brahmin, do you know this through your own direct experience? Have you penetrated this with wisdom? And the Brahmin says no. And the Buddha goes on to question him, are there any Brahmins that know this through their own direct experience and have penetrated with wisdom? No. So he just asks them over and over again these different questions. And eventually he convinces the Brahmin that, yeah, that's true. I don't know any Brahmin who knows this to be true. So then this Brahmin is quite now wondering about, okay, well, if I cannot be certain about that truth, well, what is the nature of truth? Like, and then he asks this next question, which I think is really interesting. How does one preserve the truth? Right? How does one preserve the truth? And I think the Buddha's answer is really interesting and really, really valuable. Right? So basically what the Buddha says is that unless you know something through your own direct experience and have penetrated it through wisdom, then everything else is a provisional understanding. So this word provisional, it just means temporary, right? Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Provisional, it's a provisional understanding. So, for example, I could say this. I might say, I'm 100% certain that this person won the election. Or I might say this. I believe that this person won the election beyond a reasonable doubt. So those are two different statements. In one, there's a claim of absolute truth. This is true and everything else is false. In the latter, there's receptivity just to the possibility. I may be right, I may be wrong. And this is actually how the Buddha recommends that we preserve the truth. So now getting to this notion of choosing the truth. Like, it's kind of interesting to even use that language to choose what we believe. So in this regard, Pamatar, if I could ask you to share the screen again, the second slide, the foundations of the 5 foundations of judgment, I think it's called. So when this Brahmin asks the Buddha about, how the basis upon which, about the nature of truth, the Buddha describes to him, as you can see on your screen, the Buddha describes 5 foundations upon which we can arrive at a conclusion or arrive at a view, arrive at an understanding of what's going on. Right? And then the Buddha goes on to say that we can arrive at conclusions, but they can actually turn out in one of two ways. They can actually be right or they can be wrong. They can be accurate or they can be inaccurate. Okay? So in this list, there's 5 foundations for this judgment. The first one is faith or shraddha. The second one is ruchi. And you can see 3 different translations there: approval, inclination, and approval. And I like the translation of preference. Ruchi is preference. Faith, preference. The third one, anusavo, is oral tradition. The fourth one, akara parivataka, that's reason cogitation. Right? That's just thinking through things. And the fifth one is reflective acceptance of a view. So the difference between the fourth one and the fifth one, reason, cogitation, and acceptance of a view. The fifth one is, you can imagine, like if somebody presented you with an idea, like for example, the Four Noble Truths, and then you would reflect upon what was presented. You may decide to you may decide to accept that view. That's what the fifth one is pointing at. All right. So one interesting to notice about this list is the first two, faith and preference, that these two are, they're emotional, right? I just got a feeling, or hey, I like the way this idea sounds. So it's based on our personal preferences, whereas the last two have to do with our cognitive faculties, our intellectual faculties. So this is the way in which we go about deciding what to believe in, if you will. Now, I realize this is a lot of information, so now I'd like to actually bring this back to a more practical kind of experiential level. So Palmatar, if I could ask you to stop the screen share. So let's explore this experientially, this notion of how we actually arrive at what we think, and explore the reason why we've arrived at what we think. Okay? So I'd actually like to lead us in a 1-minute guided reflection. And what this reflection will be, it'll be a reflection on the third noble truth. Right? So the third noble truth is the Buddha saying it is possible for the cessation of suffering is possible. Right? It's achievable. That's the third noble truth. Right? So the way I like to think about this is, well, actually, here's the question. So I'm going to ask a question, and so I'll just tell you what the question is before we do this guided reflection. So here's the question: is it possible for a human being to be completely free of stress and anxiety at all times and under all conditions? Okay, let me just say this one more time. Is it possible for a human being to be completely free of stress and anxiety at all times and under all conditions? Huh? Okay, so that's the question. And now what I'd like to invite us to do is just spend 1 minute just turning this question over in our minds. And we'll just see what arises in our minds. Do we agree with this? Do we not agree with this? and why? So I'll just ring a bell, then I'll repeat the question. Maybe I'll drop it in 2 times, and then I'll ring a bell again just to end the guided reflection. All right? Is it possible for a human being to be completely free of stress and anxiety at all times and under all conditions? Is it possible for a human being to be completely free of stress and anxiety at all times and under all conditions? Yes, so personally, I do not know whether this is true or not. In other words, I have not experienced this directly, and I have not penetrated this with wisdom. So I don't know if this is true. However, I choose to believe this provisionally. And if I look at that list, there's part of it of, wow, I like the way that sounds. I sure hope it's true. So there's one of my criteria. Um, and in terms of like the cognitive aspects of, reason cogitation, reflection, if you will. I have spent a number of years studying the Pali Canon, studying the teachings of the Buddha, and I have found that that there are a number of truths that are described in the Pali Canon, which I have experienced directly, and I have penetrated with wisdom. So I trust the Buddha. So therefore, I choose to believe this, with the caveat that it might be wrong, it might not be right, it might be true, it might be false. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move on in terms of the sutta. The next thing that this Brahmin asked the Buddha is he asked the Buddha about how one goes about discovering the truth. And I think the Buddha's answer is really, really interesting. And he says, well, first you have to find a teacher. And then you need to look at that person. You need to assess that person. And the criteria he gives for the assessment is, do you see any signs of greed in this person? Do you see any signs of hatred in this person? Do you see any signs of delusion in this person? Yeah, so what the Buddha is suggesting here is actually to know who the speaker is, to evaluate their ethical behavior, and also to evaluate their wisdom. So this is not an easy thing to do. Like, how do you know if someone has greed, hatred, and delusion? I think there are some obvious signs, which I'm not even going to describe. They're just obvious. But people are very good at hiding. And people are very, very good at hiding. So it's really kind of hard to know. So again, we have to just, well, here's one of my practice slogans is to do it and review it, So sometimes we just have to have faith, provisional faith. It's not blind faith, it's provisional. So the Buddha actually has some really interesting things to say about this notion of faith. And let's see, you know what, Pamatar, if you could flash up that third image on the screen. So I just wanted to say that this third image, there's a lot of information on this, and I'm not going to go through this in any detail, but I just wanted to put it out because this is the Buddha's answer to how to go about discovering the truth. And what you see here is a list of 12 things. And this is what is called a nidana chain. So this word nidana, it means condition. So what a nidana chain is it describes a list of conditions where the subsequent condition arises based upon the previous condition. So to state this colloquially, right, one thing leads to another. So the reason I wanted to show this in terms of the 12 steps is, this corresponds to discovering the truth. And as the Buddha said, the truth is very subtle. It's very hard to grasp. So therefore, one would expect that the path to discovering this truth would be quite elaborate. And as you can say, it is. It's quite elaborate. It's quite in depth, to arrive at a truth that's so subtle. So really the only step that I want to call our attention to is the first step. It actually starts with faith, with Shraddha. So Pamatar, if I can ask you to stop the screen share. So I'm just going to say a few things about faith, and then we'll wrap up. So it's really interesting that that faith, well, the Buddha actually speaks about two different types of faith. He speaks about baseless faith, which would be blind faith. So just to believe in something blindly. And he makes a distinction between baseless faith and wise faith, right? So what is wise faith? I think we all know what blind faith is. Just what is wise faith? What's the Buddha pointing at here? So as you can see, from this sutta, the Buddha says, oh, well, first go find a teacher, go look at their behaviors, their writings, everything you can observe about them in terms of greed, hatred, and delusion. And then once you come to the conclusion that they do not have greed, hatred, and delusion, then enters in this 12-step process of discovering the truth, which starts with faith, right? To place faith in someone, Now, it's wise in the sense of there was some criteria before arriving at, faith. However, this faith is provisional. So I'd like to describe how faith has evolved in my own experience, in my own practice. So in the early days of practice, I would come across teachings that I wasn't sure about. Yeah. So, for example, in an introduction to meditation class, if you sit and you watch your breath and count your breath and mindfulness of breathing, like you will develop calm, and stability of mind and all these wonderful qualities. I thought, that sounds really good. I don't know about that. And one instruction that we'll give in these introductory classes is, well, just try it out. Do it and review it. Suspend doubts. Just try it. See what happens. So, okay, I'll do that. So suspending doubt is the equivalent of like provisional faith. Well, I'm going to trust this teaching and I'll try it out and I'll see what happens. So then I would meditate. I meditated for a number of weeks, a number of months. And sure enough, the qualities that the Buddha described that would arise from a well-established meditation practice, I experienced those qualities directly. So in meditation, there are these 5 dhyana factors that are described. And I have experienced those directly in my own experience. It's like, oh, okay. Well, that gives me more confidence, more faith. Okay. And this has happened repeatedly throughout my journey, throughout my spiritual journey, where I have discovered the truth in what the Buddha has been talking about in my own experience, which then strengthens my faith, strengthens my confidence. And I still hold that what the Buddha is teaching, it might be accurate, it might not be. Right? I must discover it for myself. That's the most important thing. So as faith strengthens, as our confidence builds, there's a point at which faith, it becomes unshakable. So I quite love this term, to have unshakable faith, to have unshakable confidence in the teachings of the Buddha, and an unshakable desire to pursue those teachings and embody those teachings. Unshakable faith. So this unshakable faith, it marks the point of what's referred to in Buddhism as stream entry, where our progress becomes irreversible. And I think this is really interesting. I'll say one last thing about faith is that in the Pali Canon, it also says that when one arrives at wisdom and embodied knowing, when one has penetrated when one has seen the truth directly and penetrated it with wisdom, one no longer needs faith, because one simply knows. Well, so stepping back a bit to this notion of unbreakable faith, as we develop confidence in the teachings of the Buddha, what naturally arises is actually a radical reorientation of our lives. We begin to actually align our entire lives around that which we see to hold the greatest value. In this case, it's the teachings of the Buddha. Yeah. So baseless faith, wise faith. Wise faith is provisional. It can develop into an unshakable faith. And that unshakable faith actually can take us all the way to liberation. Yeah. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about that. I realize there was a lot of material there. Yeah. So we've got some time for any questions or comments. So if anybody would like to ask any questions or comments, please unmute your microphones and please do.